Hello, welcome to Fireside Chats. My name is Magla Pillai, and it is my pleasure to introduce to you today Sister Denise, who has been practicing Raj Yoga meditation for over 4 decades. Today's topic is entitled The Elemental Qualities of the Soul, the Elemental Components of the Soul. Sister Denise will share with us her wisdom and insight into what I consider to be a fascinating subject in an entire series that looks at what the core spirituality is. It asks you to look at whether there's a balance between your inner and outer world. We look at things like philosophical and spiritual integrity. We also look at what makes a human being tick, and also whether you have a balanced relationship between your inner world and outer world, and specifically what your relationship with God is. Do you enjoy a balanced relationship with God, or is he just a name or a concept? Sister Denise, very warm welcome to today's show.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us. Tell me, what do you understand by the term elemental components of the soul? The reason I'm asking this is because although most of us have a vague understanding of having a soul as opposed to being a soul that you shared earlier, we're not adept at understanding the intricacies of something that is invisible and intangible.
Exactly. And it is said in the description of a soul, the soul is a point of light. And so then your mind responds to that by creating a little picture within of a little white dot shining, or the soul is sometimes referred to as looking like a star. So you get a picture of a star, you've seen stars in the night sky. But the way the mind is oriented at the moment is that little star that you think of or visualize, you think of it as a thing. You take the expression, you are a soul, and this word soul is a noun referring to, as all nouns do, objects. And so the thing is that a soul is not an object, but still it has a word, it is a word.
I'm smiling because I'm thinking the thing is not a thing.
Well, that's the thing. That's the issue. And we really, in our language, we don't have a vocabulary that applies to beings.
When you say in our language, you're not just referring to English, are you? You're referring to every language on earth.
Well, languages are evolving all the time, and they are created by the people who use them, who are in body consciousness or material consciousness. So even though there are references to a being, but still you think of, a person, you say, I am this person, this is my photograph, whatever. So people really think of themselves as their body. And spirituality says, the body is there, you're talking, you're saying this is me, but it's not you. There is a spark of life. We have this expression, spark of life. You don't know what it is. It's a spark. It's a star. So you have this idea of this thing, which is not a thing. It's a being. You don't know how to visualize a being, because a being isn't physical. So it confuses the mind. And then it confuses your intelligence, because you have some sort of a sense that, you're alive, and then when somebody dies, then they're not alive, and you say, they've gone, but the body is still there. So there's a lot of unclarity around that thing called life. So looking at the elemental components of a soul. I mean, normally in the Brahma Kumari's teachings, a person will be introduced to the idea that they are a soul, and that the soul is the mind, the intellect, and the sanskaras. But if you look at the teachings closely, you will find that they say something a little different. And what they say is that the mind, the intellect, and the sanskaras are subtle organs of the soul, and that they go with the soul when the soul leaves the body. But at the same time, they're still possessions of the soul, or they're sometimes called faculties of the soul. So, what is a soul? What is a soul made of? Now, with matter, we know that matter is made up of the elements of matter. So the comparison of the spirit and matter, so matter is made of air, earth, fire, water, and ether. These are the 5 stable elements. And then there is something called the 6th element of light, which is not physical, but it nevertheless exists. And that light is the dimension in which souls exist. So the soul is conscious. The element of light is not conscious. It's a place rather than a being. Now, when the soul is just itself, not using its faculties of mind, intellect, sanskaras, then what are the components? What is it made up of? So, purity, peace, love, power, and bliss. Now, you know what love feels like. There's a vibration, you say, okay, that feels like love. You know what peace feels like? It's not the same as love. Power, when you feel power, there's a different feeling. Bliss, if you can never get that far. If you're in bliss, you'll know, and you'll say, I'm in bliss. Purity is much more subtle, and it doesn't really have a feeling connected with it, but it's to do with being clean and uncontaminated, and you might want to compare it with a perfect note, a musical note, where it's in absolute harmony, you could say that. So these are qualities. They are very difficult for people to think about as just qualities. You can have a peaceful day, or a loving person, or a powerful experience, but love just itself, peace just itself, is very, very subtle. So when a person wants to be able to experience being a soul, what they need to do is to approach it with these words, because the thing about words is they carry a feeling. And when you meditate on a word with enough information to interpret that word in the most subtle, the most spiritual way, so you want to meditate on, I am a soul, I'm a peaceful soul. So soul is already very, very subtle. Peace is also very, very subtle, but you can put it in your mind, I am a peaceful soul, and roll that phrase around in your mind, and it has the capacity of causing the mind to experience the feeling of being a peaceful soul, because the mind is capable of feeling qualities independently of the physical sense organs, and that you arrive at that by considering what is being referred to by that word. So words are physical when you write them down or you say them, but a word refers to something that is real but not a tangible thing. so that the mind can actually, by dwelling upon that word and by invoking the experience, you can actually cause that experience to happen. And then when you do have the experience, yes, I am a peaceful soul, then that can go into your memory because you experienced it at a particular moment. Then when the experience is over, you just have the memory of it. But you can consign that experience to your memory bank, and you can retrieve that memory when you want to meditate on that again. So that what you're starting with is not a blank slate, but you have a memory, and then you want to go deeper, you see. Or you say, okay, I remember how to experience that I'm a peaceful soul, now let me work with being a loveful soul. And so it's very systematic, because you're wanting to build up an inner experience of knowing on an experiential level something that is non-material but is nevertheless real, you see. And so these component parts of the soul need to be explored so that you end up with a knowing, a validation. You've been told, okay, you're a pure, peaceful, powerful, loveful, blissful soul, and then you say, well, maybe let me check. The only way you can check it is by going into and invoking the inner experience. And until you have received that experience, you can't check it. And one of the things that we also say, and we also experience, is that what God will do for a person is when that person seeks to experience that state of being a peaceful soul.
Sister Denise, what you're saying makes a lot of sense, because I just not hear the words. I can sense the truth of what you're saying. I can feel it. It's quite a tangible feeling within the studio. What concerns me, though, is if this is who and what we are as human beings, why is there total ignorance about this? Is it not the case with Mother Nature that if you are something, there's an intrinsic knowledge of who and what you are? Are we not born with it? Why is it such that our entire lives have become such a big fat lie?
You know, an analogy that I can use for this is a radioactive isotope, which has a half-life. So once half of the duration of that isotope is over, it's no longer radioactive. It becomes dead, as it were. And the same thing has happened to the soul. For half of the time of a soul in this world, the soul is strong enough to be self-conscious, soul-conscious. And then when half of time has passed, then that state of self-awareness is lost, which in religious expressions is sometimes called the fall. So once you have fallen from grace, that grace is a state of self-awareness, a state of soul consciousness, you can't get it back. It's gone. And you may remember what it was like for a while, and you may spend the rest of your existence trying to get it back, which is what I think a lot of the arts and the whole questing nature of the human experience is all about, trying to get back what's lost, which you can't even remember what you were trying to get, but when you get it, you'll know it. So I think when a person reaches that point where there is a reconnection with that which was lost, that is the great find. Then you may have found it from a point of view of, okay, you have the information, you've had an experience, you understand. but you still don't have possession of it. And possession of it is this whole process of spiritual practice in which you reacquire the strength to actually sustain yourself in a state of soul consciousness indefinitely. And that is what the practice is all about.
Okay, so Sister Denise, you said that once you start with the light and then it's darkness, then how does one transform or go back to the light? Can one go back to the light? And by light I mean return to the state of understanding. There's understanding and there's ignorance, misunderstanding. How does one go back to that? Can you do it alone? The word entropy comes to mind for some reason in this context, but how do you make that shift? Because most people, and I put myself into this category at some point in my life, you don't know that you don't know who you really are.
Well, you may not know that you don't know who you really are, but you know that you don't know that there's something that you don't know because you feel empty.
Oh, God, that was a long sentence. But go on.
There's a feeling inside something's missing.
Okay, yeah, that I can resonate with. Go on.
And that impels you to look for whatever is missing, and you don't know what you're looking for, but when you find it, you'll recognize it. So, I mean, you're on this quest, but you may be looking for a needle in the wrong haystack. So I think that, you know, the purpose of God, the function of God is to actually bring that light back to humanity and then instruct humanity on how to develop the light, cultivate the light, and actually take possession of the light to a point where you can hold on to it, not indefinitely, but almost.
Okay, so how does God do that? And Sister Denise, you know, there are many people who claim to have knowledge about God, know who God is, what He is, etc. Tell us how one is able to separate the many definitions of God from the real McCoy, okay? And secondly, what does He impart that we don't already know?
There's
the there's the messenger and there's the message.
Right. There's one piece of information that is missing, that no one is able to supply, and this is really the indicator. If there is anybody who can describe the Creator and the beginning, continuation, and end of the creation, they have the information. And it is actually only God who can describe Himself, and only God who can tell you the beginning, continuation, and end of the creation. Because everyone else is able to tell you a bit, but not the totality. So this is really the big difference between God, the omniscient, and a human being who knows to a greater or lesser extent through their instruments of perception.
Omniscient, Latin for the one who knows everything?
Yes.
Okay, so how does God impart this message, and how are you able to know from all the various messages that are available? There's so much of information in this world. There's so many millions of people looking for God, and there's so many who profess to have already found Him. How are you able to know, yeah, this is it? Where's the proof? No, it's not actually a question of proof. How do you know in your heart this is it?
You know, diamonds. They are able to be valued or evaluated by those who are expert in evaluating diamonds, those who know all about diamonds. You have to learn that. The one who is in search for truth, in search for God, they will have acquired some criteria, just as the people who evaluate diamonds, they acquire criteria, color, transparency, flawlessness, all of these characteristics. And so there are some characteristics that and some criteria that can be discerned, that if this is God, it has to be fulfilling these characteristics. Now, you may invent some other characteristics that are comfortable for you, but that's just you. But then there are other characteristics that are global characteristics, you can say. So that is one thing. We often use the word recognition. You know, when you find what you're looking for, you'll know. How do you know? It's, I think, a phenomenon that, well, people say, well, you just know. I remember in my case, many years ago, I had this feeling as a teenager growing up, and even from childhood, I had this thought, you know, I am going to meet God one fine day. Just a knowing. And so that then preoccupies the person over many years. And I think also when something really significant happens to a person, and as I have mentioned sometimes, there is for every soul an encounter with God. That means when the soul and God meet, something happens which is of gigantic proportions in terms of the impact on the soul. And that impact stays in the memory of the soul as a very deep imprint. And the soul moves through time cyclically. So when you come close to an event that is not happening, hasn't happened yet, but is going to happen, and it's an event of such significance that you can feel it in advance, a kind of premonition or precognition. So when that time is about to come, there'll be various indicators that let you know it's coming. So at that time, I remember thinking, I know I'm going to meet God, but will I recognize him? That was the concern that I had. And when the event took place, there was no problem. It was an immediate recognition, and it's a bit hard to really categorize it or quantify it, but when the time comes, the soul says, yes, this is the right one. Now, you'll say, well, how do you know? One of the ways that you know is you continue to verify it. Is it still the right one 10 years later, 20 years later, 100 years later, you see? So if something doesn't change over time, that is also a corroboration of your initial moment of recognition. And I think that you recognize something in the mind, but then your intellect, your faculties of intelligence will always want to verify that, so that the mind and the intellect work together even on this level. Do I have this right? How do I know I have this right? Well, there's this corroboration, this corroboration, this corroboration. So when the soul says, yes, that is sufficient corroboration for me to trust my perception, and continue, you see, because as soon as anything comes along to say, this is not it, then you have to reevaluate it. And then you have to put it to the test, you see. And you see, once you say to yourself, okay, this is it, you corroborate it through a million different methods that you come up with. That creates something we call faith. Not blind faith, where you believe something without any foundation, but faith. And that faith, the nature of things is that that faith is going to be tested many times. And every time you have a test of faith, then you have to re-look at that which you have faith in to see whether you still have faith in it, or whether any new information has come up to say, well, you can't actually have faith in that because of this new information. It may be a little bit like when you're looking at evidence in any court case. Sometimes new evidence comes along which says, no, your judgment is erroneous because this new evidence proves this. But when you didn't have that evidence, then it looked okay. So this is really the way that you move forward on this.
Okay, thank you so much. Unfortunately, that brings us to the end of today's show, but you've left everyone with a lot of food for thought, and for that I thank you. So there you go, brothers and sisters. What does it mean to understand the elemental components of the soul? In other words, do you know who you really are? And we're not talking about a superficial understanding, but a very real understanding of the person that is beyond your own name even. So Sister Denise has shared her understanding of it. I invite you to sit with what you've heard today. Think about it, take it deep into your heart, churn it, take it around in your own mind, and ask yourself, does this sit with you as being the truth? And I also like how Sister Denise brought the aspect of God into it as the one who imparts the truth to humanity when we have reached the stage of darkness, and He takes us back into the light. So thank you, Sister Denise, and thank you, viewer, for joining us, and good day to you.